This podcast will be talking about a 70-year-old Japanese movie, and yet I'm about to promote a product that's only available in the US and Canada. I don't mean to tease you non-North Americans, but business has to be conducted. Genjiro would expect as much. He's a businessman. He gets it. And what is that business? It's our longtime sponsor, our friends at Sparkplug Coffee. They sell you only the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada. They've got decaf and half-calf too, and also all kinds of blends and roasts. They've even got rotating seasonal blends for those whose tongues say, "Give me something different." And if you happen to be a Canadian, you'll get your bag of beans delivered for free. Americans don't get free shipping, but they, and we Canadians, will be happy to know that after you finish clicking the buttons to make an order, what you pay for will arrive in a week, or even less. Probably less. How about becoming a member? You're going to want to do that. It gets you deals that non-members don't get, and you'll save money on every single order. You can customize to get your orders when it suits your life, not when it suits Sparkplug's. Suits, Sparks. All these S's, I've realized that lately. The S's are tough for me to say when there are a lot of them in a row. Tongue-tied. Not when it suits Sparkplugs. After all, if you're a ghost, you don't want coffee orders gathering on your porch because you can't drink it anymore anyway. You can even pause or cancel your membership, if indeed you have turned into a specter who has no more need for liquids. Those are a few reasons this is not a generic Coffee of the Month club. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES is what your fingers need to type into your device. Using our HYES promo code will save you 20% off the next order you make. Okay, coffee beans are great, but you're here because I'm promising a review of a Mizoguchi classic. So, action! Have you ever seen Ugetsu? Konnichiwa, film friendlies, and arigato for downloading or streaming or watching on YouTube the 537th edition of the Classic Movies podcast known as Have You Ever Seen? We do indeed cover a wide variety of wonderful flicks. Wonderful, wonderful. And we spoil those wonderful flicks. As we officially welcome the beginning of fall tomorrow and get closer to October, which is always Scary Movie Month on this channel, I decided to cover a ghost story made by a filmmaker who'd never come up around here before, Kenji Mizoguchi. The Miz will be discussed by me alone today, and I'm Ryan Ellis. My wife Bev doesn't appear on these Friday shows, although she'll be back on Monday. She did watch the film with me, though, so some of her thoughts and reactions will come up from time to time today. Oh, and if anyone is wondering why Little Caesar isn't the choice today the way I said it would be in a previous episode, or wait, maybe I cut that out of that previous episode? You weren't expecting it? Well, anyway, I decided to push that off and get to the end of Rico some other time. Ugetsu was calling out for me like some freaky ghost in the night. Plus it was on Canopy, available, free, beautiful print, and Little Caesar isn't. Not yet, anyway. Before I get into this, I'll tell you, as I always do at this point in these solo shows, that the format is a little different when I yap on my own. I go through the plot sequentially, I do some occasionally accurate impressions of film and TV characters. Occasionally accurate, not always. I throw in plenty of asides, and I don't make any apologies for indulging in some tomfoolery. This is a serious film, though, so there might not be too many wisecracks this time. I should also apologize right now for no doubt pronouncing some names wrong. I'll do my best, but Japanese is certainly not my first language, nor my second, nor my third. I do have some Japanese words I've already thrown at you, though. Konnichiwa, arigato. I have one at the end. So let's set it up. Ugetsu was released in Japan. Am I saying that one right? Ugetsu, not Ugetsu? I think it's Ugetsu. So in Japan, 70 years ago, on March 26th, 1953, although it didn't get released stateside for another year and a half, which meant that its only Oscar nomination did not come until 1956 for the 1955 movies, when it was up for black and white costume design by Tadaoto Kainosho. I think that's what you say there. The Susan Hayward film I'll Cry Tomorrow won that trophy, though. On Rotten Tomatoes, all you see are great numbers. 100% of critics like it, while 94% of audiences do. There are 32 reviews by the critics on that site, and their average is 9.5 out of 10. My stars and garters. That's impressive. Without it really being the plan, this has turned into a year we cover flicks that were on last year's Sight and Sound Top 100 list. We've already discussed Sherlock Jr., In the Mood for Love, Safety Last, Tokyo Story, and Gene Dealman since early January. Of course, Genie Deals was the surprise #1 choice on the list last year. We reviewed that one only 1 month and 1 day ago. Ugetsu was right around 90th on Sight and Sound's Top 100 in 2022, after ranking 50th in 2012, 34th in 2002, 26th in 1992, 21st in 1982, 10th in 1972, and 4th in 1962. So it's steadily gone down, but the picture has at least ranked somewhere every single time it's been eligible. Andrei Tarkovsky is said to have been a big fan of this one, and so is Martin Scorsese. It was on Marty's 2022 Sight and Sound ballot, although he voted for 15 flicks, not 10. I guess he got to vote more than anyone else because he's Marty. He voted for 12 flicks in 2012, for that matter. There's some symbiosis there, 12 in 2012. And Ugetsu was on his list then, too. If Tarkovsky voted for it, it would have had to have been on his 1982 ballot or sooner, because he died in the mid-'80s. Although it would be appropriate for the theme of this movie if he did vote for it, when he himself was a ghost. This, by the way, marks the 44th motion picture that was part of last year's Sight and Sound's Top 100 that we've reviewed at one time or another in our history. So we're catching up, and we've got the 45th coming on Monday. Okay, everybody, hit that play button on Canopy, and let's see what Ugetsu has for us. It's a time of civil war in 16th century Japan. We open with a panning shot of the countryside. Trouble brewing. Genjiro and his brother-in-law Tobei are packing up to head to town on business, although their wives aren't happy about it. They beef at the men right up until the point they start pulling their wagon down the road. We don't see what they did in town, though, because the next thing we know, Genjiro is grinning ear to ear about the fact that he sold a bunch of wares. He's always calling them wares. My wares. My wares. What's that voice? Tobei stayed in town, though, so he could hang out with the samurai there, like all the cool guys do. But what's really going on is that Tobei is begging a horde of samurai to let him be their vassal. The answer is no, because they don't take kindly to beggars groveling at their feet. We don't take kindly to those who don't take kindly. I begged to be somebody's vassal once, and it didn't work out, so never again. No! I say no! I actually looked up vassal because it's a word I've heard plenty of times, but wasn't entirely sure what it meant. So the online Oxford Dictionary says it means a holder of land by feudal tenure on conditions of homage and allegiance. So here I am making fun of Tobei's choice of words, but it's actually a completely appropriate thing to call himself. As much as life in the city sucks for Tobei, Genjiro and his wife Miyagi, same spelling as Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid, and son Jinichi continue smiling. He bought her a kimono, which is nice and all, but she isn't that interested in nice clothes. All she wants is him. As for Tobei, he never did latch onto a meal ticket, so he comes home dirty and disheveled and a little pathetic. His wife is not too happy about that. I just said something that leads me to my nutshell for this movie, so Ugetsu in a nutshell. All I want is you. That applies to both the lovers in Genjiro's life. He wants to rake in the big bucks, but they just want the stupid lug to love them back the way they love him. Because all they want is you. Now, part of what Genjiro sold in town was some homemade pottery, which happens to be one of Bev's favorite hobbies, so she was delighted to see that. And he's back to sculpting a lot more now that he's home. Miyagi claims he's a different man, though, irritable and a little obsessed with working as hard as possible to make as much money as possible. He's made so many pots, which he and Tobei will head back to town to sell, but the wives talk smack about these guys that night. I guess these centuries-old ladies don't feel seen by their hubbies, nor heard, obviously. Although I always find this type of scene nicely complex. It isn't as simple as stay home and be with us. Of course, someone who is committed to marry someone should love them and be there for them, but they do have to work. And that usually means going somewhere else to do it. Work matters. And if they don't do it, or don't do it very well, then maybe the whole family suffers. And Genjiro sees this as a great opportunity for him to succeed as a potter and to give his family the things he wants them to have. Now, yes, Miyagi tells him flat out she doesn't want things. This is part of the running theme where the husbands in this film don't listen to their wives. But I don't think it's a simple argument either. And I'm sure Mizoguchi realized that. He didn't make a simple-minded movie. And I'm always brought back with this thought to Guy Lafleur, the hockey player for the Montreal Canadiens. I read in, I think it was Ken Dryden's book, that Lafleur's view on, his fans, his family, and I guess just hockey in general, his job, is that sometimes one of them is number one and the other things take a back seat. You never hear that from famous people. Well, my family always comes first. They do? Really? You're literally in the job right now and your wife says, your son's got a fever. What, you run home every time? Sorry, you can't. Especially if you're a surgeon or something like that. My hands are inside of somebody right now. Sometimes work comes first. Movies lecture us all the time about family is the most important thing. These are people that work 16 or 18 hours a day all the time. Okay, anyway, back to the story. Soldiers roll in the middle of the night and scare everybody. The rumor is these guys are taking men for forced labor, but they're also going to just pillage wherever they can in this village. While this is a ghost story, it's not a scary movie, but the notion of a group of violent people coming to your neighborhood to take whatever they want and hurt and maybe even kill you and the people you love is, if you think about it, the thing that should frighten all of us the most. And when you think about the modern world, the place something like that is more likely to happen is out in the country. I guess that was true then too, but not likely to happen to us. Sound alone, screaming, would be heard. The country, well, the isolation means someone who wants to badly enough can really mess you up and no one would even know. Think of that horror movie, The Strangers. But back to the story. The villagers grab whatever they can and run away, to hide out in the woods. All except for Tobei, that is, since we know he wanted more than anything else to fit in with men, just like these guys. He sneaks back, but the equally obsessed Genjiro insists that he needs to keep the fire going in his kiln, which he had stoked before they took off. Well, the fire? She did. Miyagi follows to try to talk sense to this man who's risking his life for something he could just recreate if he had to. Luckily, the pots have finished cooking, though, so Tobei and Ohama help the relatives load up the pots on a canoe. A-floating we will go, a-floating we will go. Oh, and I didn't see him, but I guess their son Jinichi came with Ohama because he's on the boat too. It's omen time because while they're making their way on the water, another boat comes out of the fog. There's only a single boatman aboard. He says he and his people were attacked by pirates. Bad stuff happened and he's all that's left. The boatman warns them to watch out or they'll suffer the same fate. Then he just up and dies on them. This film could also be called Warning, the Movie, because some village elder had lectured Miyagi a few scenes back that Genjiro shouldn't be trying to profit during these hard times. Or maybe we could call it The Omens. A lot of omens. A lot of warnings and omens. Incidentally, Kenji Mizoguchi and his team might have shot these scenes in a tank, but the fog and the artificiality worked great to make this sequence effectively surreal. The next morning, well, now they are on a real river, you can tell it's a real river there. Miyagi and Jinichi get dropped off on the shore because dear old dad doesn't want to put them in any more danger, even though they were all musing before they came across that dying boat guy that being in the river was the safer option. So you're not worried that your wife and son are in danger no matter where they are, but especially when you thought it was better that all of you weren't walking the roads, and now you're saying to her, walk the roads, or I guess walk by the river, but still, she's probably better off with you. Of course, there's no movie if they go along. There's no movie. Anyway, Genjiro, Tobei, and Ohama make it to a different town with all those excellent pots. And they're selling a lot of wares. The money is rolling in. Tobei, though, is the Rudy of this movie. He sees some samurai nearby and reminds us how badly he wants to be one. Just like Rudy would never shut up about wanting to play football for Notre Dame. I want to play football for Notre Dame. I want to play football for Notre Dame. We know! Shut up! Even though if Tobei just helped to keep making sales, he'd earn enough yen that he could truly set his sights on samuraiing. But he's like Luke Skywalker in The Empire Strikes Back. No patience. He will learn patience. He will not. In trying to chase down her husband, Ohama is cornered by soldiers, who I guess take turns raping her. Ugh. Afterwards, one of them throws money at her for her trouble. Is that an even bigger insult? To treat a rape victim like a sex worker who went through all that just for a paycheck? As if she was willing and it was a business transaction? That was a cold thing to do. I like what Mizoguchi does there, but hard to watch. All this means that Genjiro is selling the pots on his own, with no junior sales managers around. I'm the executive sales manager. He takes a break and comes across a store with an even fancier kimono than the one he bought from Miyagi, and he fantasizes about how happy she'd be to get that. Although we already know she didn't really want the first one all that badly. And along comes Lady Wakasa and her lady-in-waiting, servant, whatever you call her. They cast a spell or something on Genji and get him to follow them to a big house outside town. She's got a cool outfit and I guess he's turned on by her, but geez man, you were just fantasizing about how happy your wife would be if you bought her something nice. But I guess spells cast by determined people are effective at making weak-willed men forget they already have a family. Machiko Kyo is ethereal as Lady Wakasa. That's a good word, ethereal. But what makes her truly stand out are those marks on either side of her forehead. Look at the poster for this movie, you'll see it. She tells Genjiro that she loves the craftsmanship of his pots, but I'd say we all do. That must be pretty good quality merch if they're all he can talk about all this time. Genjiro is delighted that his handiwork lives in such a nice house. Unlike Miyagi, Wakasa encourages him to continue making more. But that servant also pipes up, basically demanding that he marry this noblewoman. That escalated quickly. It seems that soldiers attacked not only Genjiro's house, but this house too, and they killed everyone except the handful of women that are still there. That's their story and they're sticking to it. So bigamy for the G-Man it is. Maybe it's the sake talking, or maybe it's the lady seductive fan dance, or maybe old Jen just likes a woman with makeup on her head, but he's in like Errol Flynn. Although things finally start getting a little spooky in this ghost story when the women claim the voice of Okasa's dead father is coming from a suit of armor that's in the room. The dead man is supposedly all jazzed up to hear about the impending nuptials. Wakasa lets her fiancé sleep in, then she takes him to a hot spring where they get acquainted in a biblical way. Or so it seems. Movies made back then were never allowed to be truly clear about such things. But we have good imaginations. Anyway, she will be his if he's willing to commit to her entirely. When we see them canoodling at a picnic soon after, it's clear he doesn't mind being told he has to be hopelessly devoted to her. Hopelessly devoted to you. Now that song goes in Greece. That's the right phrase anyway, hopelessly devoted to you. But the hard life continues for Miyagi and Jinichi back home, or wherever they are now. They hide from hungry soldiers who are ransacking the place. Mother and son escape into the woods for a bit, but two starving men find them and beg her for some grub. One of them apparently stabs her, although I must have been taking a note and missed the point of contact. But she tries to keep moving with her wailing son clinging to her back. We're entering Grave of the Fireflies territory now. That is a powerful movie about suffering that was also made in Japan, although it came out 35 years after this did. What a heartbreaker of an ending in that one, too. We catch up with Tobe, who stabs, I guess, a general and cuts off the guy's head, which he brings to the samurai higher-ups. Wikipedia says he stole the head, but he did stab a soldier to death, right? Yeah. Anyway, he's rewarded for bringing them the head by being made a full-fledged Sam, complete with armor, a horse, and the admiration of all around. If his story ended right there, he'd be able to say, "Made it, Ma! Top of the world!" He wants to show off to his wife about the way his life has gone, but he has no idea she's now in the brothel that he visits, and she isn't working the front door. She's selling her booty to survive. After all, what else does she have? Her man took off, for all she knew he died, and she's a ruined woman, as the fella says. Of course, I don't think of her as ruined, especially since what happened to her was certainly not her choice, but a lot of crappy people would indeed say she's no longer any good. They would have said that then, and they'd no doubt say that now, too. And while I think she actually looks prettier in her new life than she did in her old one, she's also bitter and angry. I guess she has to be made up to look good for the guys, but anyway, I think she looks very pretty in this scene. The Tobes can barely speak because he's so stunned that this is how she ended up. Ohama blames him for her fate, since his obsession with the samurai is what caused him to run off and for her to try to follow him. It's a pretty stinging moment when she says he should pay for her for a night so they can celebrate his success. They collapsed each other's arms with her yelling at him the whole time. If this turned into a kiss and a consensual romp in the hay, roll in the hay, we don't see it, although he did say he could reclaim her honor. He's going to try to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And I'm not judging her honor not being hers anymore, but that's the way they looked at things back then. Meanwhile, Genjiro is out walking and meets up with a priest who tells him he needs to go home or he will die. The priest claims Jenny Boy's new ladylove is a spirit and that her ghost must be exorcised. Since we knew this was a ghost story, I guess this development isn't a total shocker. So the farmer turned potter turned kept man of a ghost realizes this whole thing really was too good to be true, so he follows the priest home. And I guess the spell's broken or will be soon. We don't see what went on beyond that, though, because the very next scene is back at the mansion. Genjiro bought a kimono for Wakasa, and she loves it, although he is clearly no longer smitten with this woman. He even looks a little scared, which I guess he should. He's told by the servant that he must never leave without Wakasa again. Very demanding, this woman. But he breaks down and tells her about his old life. But the Revenant ain't having it. Bev had noticed in a previous scene that you could see their breath when they're in this mansion, and we really noticed it in this scene. Dead people equals coldness, I guess. Isn't that a theme in The Sixth Sense, too? Guess they stole it from this, maybe. Anyway, the potter's robe is yanked open, and we now see what the priest did to our man. He painted Buddhist symbols on him, which I guess is what finally gets the ghost to admit that that's what she is, in fact, a ghost. The servant, too. I guess everybody in that house was slaughtered. Trouble is, Lady Wakasa never knew love in life, and yet it's all she wants now. Which brings me to my second nutshell. So Ugetsu, in another nutshell. Wakasa forever. This isn't Africa, and it's not Wakanda, but Wakasa forever. The servant essentially demands that Gen stay by Wakasa's side forever, and ever, and ever, and ever. He flips out, grabs a sword, and starts wildly swinging at them. If I know my ghost stories, though, hitting one of them wouldn't have had much effect. Although this movie has made it pretty clear they're really there. They're corporeal. Then again, it seems like every time he interacts with these women, it's just him in the scene, no non-believing outsiders, so maybe he didn't touch her at all, or them, well, her, I guess, mostly. That paints all kinds of pictures of weirdness when you consider he was supposed to have kissed, hugged, and probably, well, did certain other things to her. With her, to her. Weird images, isn't it? Genjiro stumbles out of Kutsuki Manor, did I say that right? Kutsuki? And collapses, seeming to pass out. Then hey, it's daytime. Soldiers happen by, say he stole the sword, and that he couldn't have gotten it from the manor like he claims, since it's just a ruined husk of a building, which we do see. They ain't lying. And the dream is over. And since the soldiers took the sword and his money, all he has are the clothes on his tattoo-painted back. No pots even anymore. So, much like Tom Hanks in most of his movies, Genjiro's quest is now to go home. He doesn't see Miyagi in the first pass through the house, but then does see her when he comes back around. After what he just went through with the spirits in that mansion, you think maybe he'd suspect it's happening again? He isn't even surprised that his family is safe and sound, although he certainly should be. There are roving killers everywhere. And she's not mad at him for leaving. She just wants her man back and won't even let him confess what he did with the dead lady and her dead lady friends. The movie could have ended this way, with our main man learning a valuable lesson about appreciating the love you have, but he's not getting his happy ending just yet. As Gen cradles his sleeping son, the camera centers on Miyagi, who's softly crying. I'd say that this is the key shot in the entire film. If her husband had listened to her, she would probably not be dead. Okay, spoiler alert, I'm a little late with that, but I already told you it'd be spoilers, and we're about to talk about this in detail in a second anyway. And he wouldn't have to feel guilty about the past few days or weeks he spent off romancing someone else. I was surprised how much time we spend with Miyagi just doing things while her son and husband sleep. After all, she isn't really there anymore, Sixth Sense-esque. Maybe Mizoguchi wanted to throw us off the track for another minute or so before the big reveal, which I've already blown for you, but you saw the movie, didn't you? The village chief bangs on the door the next day, since he's been taking care of Junichi ever since Miyagi died. What happened was, the stabbing I mentioned a few minutes ago did do her in, although she managed to at least get her son to safety. The chief normally has the boy stay with him, but the youngin must have needed to spend a little time in the old domicile, which is why Jen found him there. Masayuki Mori turns his head away from the camera at this point, so we can't see any emotion in Genjiro's face about learning this terrible news, which is a direction by Mizoguchi that I really liked, or maybe it was the actor doing it on his own, but in any case, I like that way to do it. Then he squats down and reaches out to stroke the hair of where maybe he's still imagining Miyagi is kneeling. Oh, and Tobei did buy back Ohama's virtue, so that's how it's done, with a pile of money. And they return home, although she's ragging on him the whole time. Louis. From Jackie Brown, remember that? That came to mind. So I said that, and Bev laughed out loud. I don't think Tobei is ever going to turn around and shoot her for talking too much, though. He might have to accept being bitched at for the rest of his life. That, yes. No shooting. As for Genjiro, he cries over his dead wife's grave, but then gets back to making pottery. The dead Miyagi does a long voiceover talking about how he's the man she wanted him to be, a homebody who takes care of his son. There are a lot of ways you could have handled this voiceover. Bitter, sad, disappointed. But I suspect the idea is, this is what Genjiro would want her to say to him. So maybe it's just his imagination, and her actual voiceover would be, "You left me to die, you idiot." The last beat touched me, as Ohama gives her nephew a plate of food, but Junichi puts that plate on his mother's grave, paying homage to the woman who made sure he survived, even though she didn't. So the cast. Masayuki Mori is Genjiro. He didn't seem to be in Mizoguchi's other major titles, but he was in The Idiot, and played Takahiro in the brilliant Rashomon. Both of those were Kurosawa pictures. Mori didn't live to be all that old, which is true about other actors in this, and their director. Mori died of cancer when he was only 62. I mentioned Rashomon, which we reviewed about 3 years ago. Well, Mori is the samurai who has to deal with Mifune's bandit character, and his wife was Machiko Kyo, who plays Lady Mikasa in this. She's also in Floating Weeds for Ozu. Kinyo Tanaka is the doomed Miyagi. She acted in many projects, but she directed a half dozen times too, which not a lot of Japanese women were doing at that time, or American women for that matter. She even had Mori starring for her in the first picture she directed, Love Letter, which came out the same year this did. She only outlived Mori by a few years. She died of a brain tumor at 66. Are all these early deaths coincidence, or is it just because of the fallout from the nuclear bombs that America dropped on Japan during World War II? Did I say nuclear or nuclear? Nuclear. It's pronounced nuclear. Ohama is Mitsuko Mito's role. She only got 62 years on this planet herself, but acted a lot during that time. I don't recognize much in her resume, but she did do several in the series of flicks called Samurai. Toshiro Mifune was in some of those pictures with her. Sakai Ozawa, who's also known as Eitaro, E-I-T-A-R-O, Eitaro Ozawa, is the samurai wannabe Tobei. He practically lived on movie sets, especially in his younger days. The guy made over 280 motion pictures in his career. He also lived a lot longer than many of his castmates did. He made it to 79. He was in a couple of Godzilla sequels in the 80s and was appropriately in one of those samurai flicks with Mifune and Mito. To be specific, it was called Samurai 1 Musashi Miyamoto. By the way, the kid that plays Junichi, let's see, where is it? Ichisaburo Sawamura. Maybe I said that right. I cut some of that out. I tried that a few times. Kid never acted again. Kenji Mizoguchi directed a lot of films in his career, and many of them are revered as much as, or more than this was. He did Sancho the Bailiff and The Life of Oharu, around the same time he made Ugetsu, actually, and also the story of the late chrysanthemums. And sometimes you see last chrysanthemums, but I thought I saw on the screen when I watched it, late chrysanthemums. Of all of Mizoguchi's many titles, I believe those are the only 4 I've ever seen. I looked up how they're all doing on Rotten Tomatoes, incidentally. Sancho and Oharu have perfect reviews, just like Ugetsu does, 100% fresh. Chrysanthemums has 94%. The Gooch started making movies in the silent era. It made me laugh when I wrote that down the first time, and it does now too. Sometimes my own stuff is way funnier for me than it probably is for you. He started making movies in the silent era when he was about 25 years old. He wasn't a guy who wrote a ton of his own pictures, although he does have a writing credit on The Life of Oharu. And like so many of his stars in this movie, the man died young. Leukemia took him when he was only 58 years old. As for the writers, they were Matsutaro Kawaguchi and Yoshikata Yoda. They based it on two stories in Ueda, Akinari's 1776, the year the Americans became Americans, however that goes. The book was called Ugetsu Monogatari. Wonder if I said that right. The movie sometimes is called that, with that Monogatari part added. I think on Rotten Tomatoes it says that when you look up Ugetsu, but IMDb it just says Ugetsu. That roughly translates to Rain Moon Tales, or From Tales of Moonlight and Rain. That's what it says in the actual opening credits on Canopy's Criterion print, by the way, which is in 4x3 in black and white. The craft that went into Ugetsu is phenomenal. This picture looks and sounds wonderful. I don't think I wrote down any of the technical people, did I? Let's see here. Cinematographer was Kazuo Miyagawa. Editor was Mitsuko Miyata. The music was by three people: Hayasaka, Mochizuki, and Saito. Some of these names might be familiar. I think Miyagawa shot something we've covered. What was it? Rashomon. I'm way over here. I'm looking the other way. Fascinating to you. There you go. Rashomon, which I've mentioned a lot today. To sum it all up, I thought this was a terrific film. It's definitely my favorite of the four Mizoguchis I've seen. The story of the late or last chrysanthemums was the least of those. I saw it fairly recently and it just didn't capture my imagination. It was also a terrible print that I think I recorded off TCM. So the movie was literally hard to watch. Sancho the Bailiff is probably the Mizoguchi that most people like the best, but I saw it so long ago and it hasn't stuck in my mind the way I'm sure Ugetsu will. I've seen Ugetsu twice, and these other ones only once each too, so there's also that factor. To be honest, I always wonder if I would rave even more about these classic films that were made in other languages if I spoke that language. It seems logical, right? You'd know what they're truly saying, not getting a translated version through subtitles, which probably isn't always accurate to the actual dialogue. Sometimes French movies, I know a little French from high school, and I feel like that's not what was said, or they're missing something. I could recognize that. You know what I'm saying? And also, if you spoke the language, you could focus on watching their faces and their actions rather than reading the bottom of the screen all the time. And of course, it would help if I knew the actors better, the way I do with, say, Hollywood stars. I say this, though, as someone who has watched a lot of subtitled movies this year, because I've been trying to see as many of the sight and sound films as I can. This is also, I believe, the 6th foreign language film we posted on this channel this year, with another one coming on Monday. Anyway, Ugetsu touches on some universal themes of love, loyalty to your family, and power dynamics in marriages, not to mention the responsibilities of the breadwinner. Also the burden of being the wives of men who just don't listen to them. One becomes a prostitute, and the other one dies. Those fates aren't directly because of Genjiro and Tobei, but the women wouldn't have been put in those positions if their men weren't trying to do things their wives are pleading with them not to do. And actually, I'm the one who complained about how so many sight and sound films tend to be about women suffering. I said that during the Gene Dealman podcast Bev and I did. I guess here's another one, although I didn't really see it that way while I was watching it. I'm just coming to that conclusion now. In any case, that was Ugetsu, a ghost story here towards the end of September. It wasn't frightening, but it had an eerie quality, especially maybe from the middle point on. So yes, we are getting closer to our 8th annual Scary Movie Month, but we're not there just yet. On Monday, you'll be getting another black and white classic that was made in another land, and it was also made by an acknowledged master filmmaker, Federico Fellini. Bev and I will be speaking to you about Mr. Feds for the first time as we review 8½, also on the Sight and Sound list. The next podcast to do on my own will be on Monday, October 9th. We will be well into Scary Movie Month by then, obviously 9 days in, and I'm going to yammer away about The Exorcist. Bev is not a fan of that one, but I've always loved it, and I've got plenty of thoughts about Billy Friedkin's horror opus. Friedkin recently died for that matter. That could be a long one, long episode. Talk to us by sending us an email or a tweet. Our email address is haveyoueverSeenPodcast@gmail.com. To find us on Elon Musk's social media site, there's a lot of S's right there. Elon Musk's social media site. Look for @MovieFiend51 and @BevEllisEllis. While you can tell us what you think about our podcast in those ways, you can also comment on YouTube. All of our 2023 shows have been uploaded onto @HYESEllis in your browser, or look for Have You Ever Seen in the YouTube search bar. So tell us what you think, rate, share, and for God's sake, subscribe. Then you can't miss when we post a podcast on there. Do that there and or on your favorite podcast app. Just subscribe to us across the board. Then you're all set. And I'll say before I go that we're sponsored by Sparkplug Coffee. Use our HYES promo code and save 20% off your next order. Your destination is sparkplug.coffee/HYE. You're going to guess? S. So HYES. And that's that. Thanks a lot for checking this one out. It's always a worthy challenge to review films made in other languages, especially when we've never previously covered the people that made them. Mizoguchi, welcome to the HYES Club. Great film, sir. And cut, or as they say in Japan, kato.